To this wild day, I'm joined by Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. He's also a member of the Judiciary Committee. And Senator, I mean, of all states, I mean, Louisiana, if you refuse to work for people that were trying to stab you in the back or investigate you, I don't think it would be a state.
Well, that's fair, and certainly you just described Washington. Look, I just listened to your very able colleagues there talking about this. I mean, you know, I don't know what the president's motivation is. It could be Machiavellian. It could be he's just frustrated, and I understand why he's frustrated. I think that some, I don't want to speak with too broad a brush, but some members of the House leadership, they're just toying with him. I meant what I said. They need to urinate to get off the pot. Go ahead and impeach him if you think he deserves to be impeached. He won't be convicted in the Senate, but stop toying him. And you say, well, you know, they're in good faith. Some have said that. Well, maybe some. But let me give you an example, Chuck. The House Ways and Means chairman, he says, I got to see Trump's tax returns because it'll help me evaluate how well the IRS conducts audits. Right. And Jimmy Hoffa died of natural causes. Nobody believes that. So what I tell my House leadership friends, look, either impeach him or go ahead and hold every member of the Trump administration in contempt, and let's get it in the court and so we can get back to work. And let me say one other thing. I was equally critical of my Republican colleagues in the Senate, because we can do more, too. We need to bring some of those bills to the floor that your colleagues just talked about.
Let me ask you this. Do you think it would be cathartic for the country for essentially, you know, impeachment is not an automatic, you know, it doesn't mean you're voting them out of office. You're bringing charges. You're having a trial, essentially, you know, and the House is the prosecutor and you guys would be the jury. Is there an argument to be made that actually that would be the most healthy, cathartic exercise, in that everybody would see everything? There wouldn't be a redacted this or a redacted that. There'd be public hearings and a public trial, and in some ways either everybody would see for themselves. Is there any part of that you think, well, as nasty as that could get, as divisive as that could get, it's better than this?
Here's what I honestly think, Chuck. I think the people in America who care about this issue, which is political, as you know, are the well-intentioned crankwings. I think most Americans, center right, center left, the ones who get up every day, go to work, obey the law, pay their taxes, I don't think they care about who's up or who's down or who's winning or who's losing. I think they expect Congress to try to do things to make their lives better. And they look at us, I've said this before, they look at all of us and wonder how we made it through the birth canal. Why don't they say, I mean, my people back home say it, they don't say it this way, but they say, why don't you guys spend a little bit of time thinking about the next generation instead of all of your time thinking about the next election? And that's true of Republicans, too. I mean, I gave a speech on the floor today. Why haven't we brought a bill on prescription drugs? There's common ground there. Why haven't we allowed to consider a bill reforming the National Emergencies Act?
What does Mitch McConnell say? I mean, the Democrats will say that Mitch McConnell doesn't want to give House Democrats bills their due and all this. What does leadership say to you?
Mitch is not chairman of every committee. Now, and I didn't come on here to be personal and call out names.
No. I was just asking. He's the man. He's in charge.
I was sent up here, and I think most senators were, to deliberate and decide, not to participate in delay and stultification. And here's what some of my colleagues say to me. They say, Kennedy, we're in an election cycle. You don't understand, okay? This isn't the way it's done. Well, first, we're always in an election cycle. Number two, maybe what I'm suggesting is not the way it's been done, but frankly, for the last 10 years, the way we've been doing it sucks. And secondly, they say, well, you're taking a pretty big risk there. Well, maybe we are. Maybe we'll win. What's the problem with putting a prescription drug bill? We don't need the President of the United States permission or the House's permission on the floor of the United States Senate, and let's see if we can pass it. I promise you, I'm not saying it'll pass. I don't know. There's one way to find out. But we have more in common on that issue than we don't. Same thing on infrastructure. Same thing on reforming the National Emergencies Act.
Do you know what viewers are saying? They're sitting there going, there are probably a lot of people going, amen. But then they're going right back and like, well, and I know you're one of 100, and I could explain that to them, but explain why you alone can't do it.
Because I can't bring a bill to the floor of the Senate. Only the majority leader can. And in the House of Representatives, it's even worse. If Speaker Pelosi, she wouldn't do this, but if Speaker Pelosi told all of her people to line up and join the Taliban, they'd say, where's the line? That's the way the House works. I'm not saying she would do that. Of course she wouldn't do that. But my point is, there are two people running the House, and we both know it. One's Nancy Pelosi, and the other one's Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. Now, there are more people involved in the Senate.
But let me add, well, a lot of people, what you just said, just basically look at it, it's essentially the president and Mitch McConnell decide what gets negotiated and what gets done. Let me ask you this. The president said, you're not going to legislate.
We're not legislating anyway.
So what do you, when are some of you then going to go rogue on your own and go start meeting with like-minded House members and go come up with your own infrastructure deal? Come up with your own prescription drug bill.
I don't have any control over the House, and the two people I just mentioned do. One has the lever, the other one has the media, if you will. But in the Senate, yeah, I'm talking about it a lot. And some of my colleagues agree with me. And I'm not saying we've done nothing in the Senate. We've confirmed some really fine judges. I know you may disagree. Listen to my words. I'm not saying we've done nothing. I'm saying we could do more.
Yeah.
And put a prescription drug bill on the floor of the United States Senate, by God, and let senators be senators. What's the worst that can happen? It'll fail.
I'm curious, Senator, have you read the full Mueller report?
I have.
What did you make of Justin Amash's take?
You're going to have to refresh my memory. It was kind of
Well, he's the
dense.
Republican. I mean, he looks at it and he saw that.
Oh, yes. He's entitled to his opinion. This is America. He's entitled to his opinion. I don't agree with him. I looked, when a prosecutor takes hold of a case, his job is to, or her job is to do one or two things: indict or don't indict. Now, if Mr. Mueller has changed his mind and he thinks Trump ought to be indicted, he needs to step up in front of God and country and say so.
Okay.
But he said no indictment, and he didn't say, I've read it, he didn't say no indictment because of DOJ policy. He told Bill Barr 3 times, I did not decide not to indict because of solely because of the DOJ policy.
All right. Well, that we only know from Bill Barr. We have yet to hear that from Bob Mueller.
True.
And that's something I think we all want to hear from. Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, always I always appreciate it. You coming on and sharing your views.
If you speak ill of Louisiana, God will punish you.
I never will. Oh, I know.
God will punish you.
Not just God, probably Huey Long, too, still.
You bet.
All right. Senator, thanks very much. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.